Good day, everyone. This is Doc Mims. Today, we will be talking about biochemistry made easy. I hope you will learn something from me. What is biochemistry? When we say biochemistry, it's taken from the word biology, which is the study of life and living organism, and chemistry, which is the study of matter, its properties, how and why substances combine and separate to form other substances. Sa biology, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito is the basic unit of life, which is the cell. So, cell ang pinag-uusapan. Pinag-uusapan natin ang components ng cell, like the cell membrane or the cell wall, ang nucleus, ang mitochondria, ang endoplasmic reticulum, ang Golgi bodies, at iba't ibang components ng cell. Sa chemistry naman, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito ay chemicals, elements, atoms, matter. Pinag-uusapan natin ang mga elements like hydrogen, pinag-uusapan natin ang carbon dioxide, ang nitrogen, and also ang different properties nila. Pinag-uusapan natin ang acids, bases, and different chemical and laboratory procedures. If we combine these two disciplines, ito na ang biochemistry. So biochemistry is actually biological chemistry. It is the study of chemical processes within and relating to living organisms. So sa chemistry, usually organic or inorganic chemistry, mga dry substances lang pinag-uusapan natin, mostly ha. Whereas sa biochemistry, we are talking about the chemical processes inside the cell. Okay, so what is biochemistry all about? Ano ba talaga ang biochemistry? So biochemistry is all about four molecules. So it's all about carbohydrate, lipid, protein, and nucleic acid. The first three, we have carbohydrates. Okay. The first three, which is carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, ito, we usually encounter this in metabolism sa mga pagkain natin. And this, the other one, nucleic acid, we encounter this in reproduction, in DNA and protein synthesis. So basically, this is biochemistry. It talks about these four big molecules. Not that big, but it talks about these four molecules. So let's go to metabolism. So let's start talking about metabolism. So kung tingnan nyo, may pagkain. So this food na it's a mixture of carbohydrates, fats, proteins. Pag kinain natin to, dinigest, inabsorb, ang carbohydrates na macromolecule magiging simple sugars, ang fats magiging glycerol at fatty acids, ang proteins magiging amino acids. And inabsorb ng katawan natin, and they will be used sa cellular respiration to generate ATP. So it's simple. When you talk about the biochemistry of carbohydrates, the biochemistry of fats, the biochemistry of proteins, it's all about using this food stuff in the metabolism to make simple sugar, to digest the fats, the proteins, and use it in cellular respiration to generate energy molecules, or what we call ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. So let's move on. For this day, we will talk about the biochemistry of carbohydrates. So the carbohydrates from food digested into glucose. So as you can see, ito siya, kumain siya ng banana na may 17 grams na carbohydrates which is broken down into glucose. So mula saging, na-digest mo siya, naging glucose at pumasok siya sa bloodstream. So carbohydrates from food digested into glucose, glucose absorbed in the intestines and enters the blood. And then glucose enters the cell. Hopefully later on, you will understand the glucose transporters. May mga cell na iba-iba ang glucose transporter. When glucose enters the cell, kailangan niya, especially in skeletal muscles, kailangan nila ng tinatawag na insulin. That's why we have certain diseases like diabetes na konti or wala silang insulin, so the glucose does not enter the cell. So ang nangyayari kahit ipa-fasting mo sila, when you take their blood, the sugar content of their blood is still high. Why? Because hindi makapasok ang glucose sa cell. So, nagsisirculate lang siya sa bloodstream. And after the glucose will enter the cell, there is a chemical reaction called glycolysis. So today, we will talk about glycolysis. We will define glycolysis. We will talk about the steps, the enzymes, the process, the products, and in detail, titingnan talaga natin ang mga molecules and the interaction with different enzymes. So what is cellular respiration? Cellular respiration is the process of glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain. As you can see here, glycolysis is the first sa tatlong cellular respiration chemical processes. Here you can see glucose. It occurs in the cytoplasm. Ang glucose natin na-divide into 6 carbon atom to siya, 6 na carbon. Oo, na-divide into tatlong pyruvate. Saan siya nangyayari? Sa cytoplasm. In this process sa glycolysis, nakaka-produce na tayo ng energy molecules. This includes NADH and some ATP. Pero hindi ganon karami. Ang nangyayari is, after glycolysis, the pyruvate enters the mitochondria. So from cytoplasm siya, papasok siya ng mitochondria to undergo Krebs cycle. Pag nag-undergo siya ng Krebs cycle, makakaproduce na naman ng mga energy molecules like ATP and NADH. After that, after the Krebs cycle, papasok na naman siya sa tinatawag ng electron transport chain wherein mas maraming ATP or energy molecules ang mapoproduce. So when we say glycolysis, so let's define first, ano ba talaga ang glycolysis? So when we say glycolysis, it's glyco from the word glucose and lysis, which means breakdown. So it's about breaking glucose, breaking down the glucose molecule. The glucose molecule is composed of 6 carbon. And then you will break it down into 3 carbon molecule na tinatawag nating pyruvate. So when we say glycolysis, it's a story about breaking down the carbon molecule, breaking down the glucose molecule from a 6 carbon molecule into a 3 carbon molecule called pyruvate. So it is a cytoplasmic pathway which breaks down glucose into 3 carbon compounds and generates energy. So nakikita nyo naman ang mga naka-bold and capital letter na words sa definition. Number 1, it's cytoplasmic, meaning nangyayari siya sa loob ng cytoplasm ng cell. Number 2, it breaks down glucose. So, ang glucose natin na 6 carbon, nagiging 2 pyruvate na 3 carbon molecule. And lastly, generates energy. Nakaka-generate ang process ng glycolysis ng mga energy molecules called ATP and NADH. Itong NADH, is later on can also be converted to ATP or adenosine triphosphate. Meron yan tayong tatlo. Pag isang phosphate lang, adenosine monophosphate. Pag dalawa, adenosine diphosphate. And pag tatlo, adenosine triphosphate. Okay, so let's move on. So glycolysis. In this lesson, we will talk about the steps, we will talk about the enzymes, we will talk about the process, and we will talk about the products. By knowing these four, you will number one understand, you will number two memorize, and hopefully we can apply the knowledge of biochemistry, specifically glycolysis, in our clinical practice. Or at least we can answer questions thrown to us regarding glycolysis. So let's start with the steps. So, these are the steps of glycolysis. So, kung tingnan nyo, from the right, we have the molecular name, and next is the carbon structure. Just I have said before, glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. May 6 na carbon molecule na nakadikit. So, nakadikit yan siya. Para siyang beads. Glucose. So, that is the initial step. From a glucose, nako-convert natin siya or naglalagay na, we will add phosphate. So, naglalagay tayo ng P. Saan natin nilalagay ang P? Sa 6th carbon. So, this is the first carbon and this is the 6th carbon. Kaya siya tinawag na glucose 6-phosphate. So, kino-convert natin ang glucose molecule into glucose 6-phosphate. Anong ibig sabihin? It means, ang glucose molecule mo, naglagay ka ng isang phosphate molecule. Saan mo nilagay? Nilagay mo sa pang-6 na carbon molecule. Oo. So, kung tingnan natin, ito ang first carbon. We have to change the color. Let's go to that. Ito ang first carbon. Wait. There's something wrong. And ito ang first carbon natin. Ito ang first. Ito ang ika-6th carbon natin. So when we transform glucose into glucose 6-phosphate, ibig sabihin, we are attaching phosphate sa ika-6 na carbon molecule ng glucose. Kaya siya tinawag na glucose 6-phosphate. So ang next step, so from glucose to glucose 6-phosphate, ang next step is from glucose 6-phosphate to fructose. So, nagiging fructose 6-phosphate with the use of an enzyme. Ang nangyayari dito, bakit nag-change ng name? Ang nangyayari dito is, there is just a rearrangement ng interaction ng molecules. There is a rearrangement in the structure. So, nag-change lang siya ng name. But, ang carbon molecules mo ay 6 pa rin. Ang phosphate mo is isa pa rin. And it is attached on the 6th carbon molecule. So, ikapang-6 na carbon. So, from glucose, naging glucose 6-phosphate, naging fructose 6-phosphate. Ang next step is from fructose 6-phosphate, naging fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So, anong ibig sabihin ng fructose 1,6-bisphosphate? Ang ibig sabihin ng fructose 1,6-bisphosphate ay bisphosphate, 2 phosphate. So, ang fructose ngayon may 2 na siyang phosphate. Ang first phosphate niya nakalagay sa ikapang-6 na carbon. Ang isang phosphate niya ay nakalagay sa first carbon. So, meron na tayong molecule na tinatawag na fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Ibig sabihin, ang fructose molecule natin may 2 phosphate. Yung isang phosphate attached sa first carbon. Ang ang next phosphate attached sa 6th carbon atom. Okay, I hope naintindihan natin lahat. So, ang next is from fructose bisphosphate to DHAP or G3P. Ang enzyme na nagagamit dito is aldolase. Later, we will discuss the enzyme aldolase and the reaction regarding the breakdown of fructose 1,6-bisphosphate into DHAP and G3P. So kung tingnan natin, ang fructose 6-bisphosphate na 6 ang sugar na divide na siya into dalawa. So from 6 sugar, naging dalawa na siya na tig-tatlong carbon atom. Okay, tig-tatlong carbon atom. Okay, ang next is the chemical reaction from the G3P or DHAP to 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. Kung tingnan nyo, may additional phosphate na naman tayong nilagay. Ito yung isa, ito yung isa. So may tatlong carbon atom tayo. This is the first, this is the second, this is the third. So may nilagay tayong isang phosphate sa third at isang phosphate sa first. So next, nandito na tayo sa step ng 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, meaning may naka-attach na phosphate sa ating first carbon. Ito, sa ating first carbon at sa ating first carbon and sa third carbon atom natin. Kaya siya tinawag na 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. Bisphospho meaning dalawang phosphate sa glycerate molecule. Saan naka-attach? Sa 1,3, carbon 1 and carbon 3. At nakikita nyo naman, klaro, sa first carbon dito and the third carbon. Okay. So next, from 1,3-biphosphoglycerate, ang next step is 3-phosphoglycerate. Bakit 3-phosphoglycerate? Why? Kasi sa next step, we remove the phosphate. Ito sa carbon 1, we remove it. Ang natirang phosphate is doon sa attached sa carbon 3 ng glycerate molecule. So kaya siya tinawag na 3-phosphoglycerate. Ang next step, from the third carbon, naka-attach ang phosphate sa third carbon, transfer natin siya to the second carbon, ang phosphate natin. Kaya ang tawag na sa kanya ngayon is 2-phosphate, 2-phosphoglycerate. I hope klaro. For example, meron kang tatlong estudyante, student 1, student 2, student 3. Initially, binigay mo ang saging sa third student. Yun ang 3-phosphoglycerate. And then, kinuha mo ang saging sa kanya, binigay mo sa second, yung sa gitna, second student. So, naging 2-phosphoglycerate. And lastly, transfer mo na naman sa third carbon. At ang molecule ay naging phosphoenol pyruvate. Ito na ang second to the last. And ang last step would be, you remove the phosphate group. Okay? So, meron tayong phosphate. Ang last step was, you remove the phosphate. So, ang natira is ang tatlong carbon molecule called pyruvate. So these are the steps of glycolysis. So basically, glycolysis is a story of glucose turning into pyruvate. Or specifically, it's the story of breaking glucose into a 6-carbon molecule into dalawang tag-3 carbon molecule ng pyruvate. So ngayon, how can we memorize this? It's one of the problem. Paano po natin maalala? How can we remember? From glucose, naging glucose 6-phosphate, naging fructose 6-phosphate, naging fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, naging DHA or G3P, naging 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, naging 3-phosphoglycerate, naging 2-phosphoglycerate, naging phosphoenolpyruvate, naging pyruvate. So, napakahirap ng process kung tingnan natin from the outside, from the outset, and hindi madaling i-memorize. So what we did, we created a mnemonics. So ang ginawa natin is, good guys feel frustrated and depressed. So good guys, glucose 6-phosphate, feel frustrated, fructose 6-phosphate, and fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, and depressed for the DHAP. Ang next, so alam na natin, pwede natin ma-memorize to. Ang next is from the G3P hanggang sa pyruvate. So ang mnemonics is, good boys prefer plain pink pajamas. So G3P, 1,6-bisphosphoglycerate, 3-phosphoglycerate, 2-phosphoglycerate, phosphoenolpyruvate, and pyruvate. So hopefully, with practice, ma-memorize natin and ma-remember natin ang steps of glycolysis. So, ang next. So, steps. Tapos na tayo sa steps. Next is the enzymes. So, ano-ano ang mga enzymes involved in glycolysis? So, we have hexokinase, phosphohexose isomerase, phosphofructokinase, aldolase, dehydrogenase, G3P, hanggang pyruvate kinase. And there are other books, for example, yung phosphohexose isomerase, ang tawag nila is phosphoglucose isomerase. But in most of the books, these are the names ginagamit nila sa enzymes in glycolysis. May isa pa dyan, but may isa pang isomerase, hindi ko na in-include, but we will discuss it pag nasa details na tayo. And also, we made mnemonics para hindi natin madali nating ma-memorize ang mga enzymes involved. So, ang first, gi-familiarize natin ang steps. Ang next, gi-familiarize natin ang enzymes. So ano ang mnemonics ng enzymes? Hello, PGI. Please accept the merits from physicians performing excellent practice. So, hexokinase, phosphohexoisomerase, phosphofructokinase, aldolase, dehydrogenase, physicians phosphoglycerate, phosphoglyceromutase, enolase, and lastly, pyruvate kinase. Let's move on. Let's go to the process. So, ano ang process? So, this is the process. Sabi ko nga, glycolysis is a story of glucose breaking down into pyruvate. From a 6-carbon molecule breaking down into 2 units of 3-carbon molecule called pyruvate. Pero let's divide this process. Let's divide this chemical reaction into 2. Dito natin i-divide. So we have the phase 1, or what we call as the energy investment phase. And ito, phase 2, or the energy generation or energy production phase. Bakit ganun ang pangalan nila? We will explain pagdating natin sa product. Okay, let's start discussing konting detail regarding the process of the phase 1 from glucose to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. So it starts with the chemical called glucose. We have this chemical, we have this molecule. With the help of hexokinase and ATP, nagiging glucose 6-phosphate siya. When we say kinase, remember this, when we say kinase, A siya eh. That's an enzyme. Kinase means to transfer or to add phosphate. I repeat, kinase means is an enzyme for transferring or adding phosphate group. So, ang story nito, from glucose to glucose 6-phosphate, sa tulong ni hexokinase, umutang ka ng isang phosphate sa ATP para maging glucose 6-phosphate siya. Ang ATP, pag isa lang, adenosine monophosphate. Pag dalawa, adenosine diphosphate. Pag tatlo, adenosine triphosphate. So basically, ang ATP may tatlo siyang phosphate attached. So inutang ni hexokinase ang isa, ninatouch niya sa glucose, kaya naging glucose 6-phosphate. Anong part ng glucose molecule? Sa ikapang-anim na carbon. Kaya siya naging glucose 6-phosphate. Ngayon, from glucose 6-phosphate, ang next reaction natin is naging fructose 6-phosphate with the help of the enzyme phosphohexose isomerase. When we say isomerase, it's an enzyme for rearrangement. So may rearrangement lang siya sa molecule ng glucose 6-phosphate at naging fructose 6-phosphate na siya. Paano ang rearrangement? We will discuss it pagdating natin sa details. So from glucose 6-phosphate, naging fructose 6-phosphate. As you can see, ang chemical reaction is merong pataas at merong pababa. Meaning, ang chemical reaction na to with the use of phosphohexose isomerase, pwede ang glucose 6-phosphate matransform mo into fructose 6-phosphate at ang fructose 6-phosphate matransform mo into glucose 6-phosphate. So it's a reversible. Pabalik-balik. Pwede ka papunta from glucose 6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate. Pwede naman from fructose 6-phosphate to glucose 6-phosphate. Bakit? Mayroon bang non-reversible or irreversible? Mayroon. If you look at this, from glucose to glucose 6-phosphate, ang reaction natin is pang isang direction lang. From glucose to glucose 6-phosphate. At hindi other way around. Hindi from glucose 6-phosphate to glucose. Let's continue. The next is from fructose 6-phosphate to fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So balik tayo. Anong enzyme? Phosphofructokinase. Sabi ko nga, pag kinase, it's mag-add ka ng phosphate or mag-transfer ka ng phosphate. So, ang ginawa ni phosphofructokinase, umutang na naman siya ng phosphate sa ATP. So, ang ATP may tatlong phosphate, inutang na naman ni phosphofructokinase at inattach niya ang P na to sa fructose 6-phosphate. Kaya nagkaroon ng dalawang phosphate si fructose 6-phosphate. So, ang product natin is fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Bisphosphate meaning dalawa ang phosphate niya. 1,6 meaning ang isang phosphate attached sa carbon 1 kasi may 6 tayong carbon atom. Ang isang phosphate naka-attach dito sa carbon 1 at ang pangalawang phosphate ay naka-attach sa carbon 6. Kaya siya tinawag na fructose 1,6-bisphosphate with the help of the enzyme phosphofructokinase. Ngayon, from fructose 1,6-bisphosphate and the help of aldolase enzyme, pwede siya maging glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate or pwede siya maging dihydroxyacetone phosphate. This is a reversible reaction. Pwede siya pababa, pwede siya pataas. Meaning, pwede ang fructose 1,6-bisphosphate ma-convert mo into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Pwede naman ang dalawang glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, gawin mo siyang fructose 1,6-bisphosphate with the help of the enzyme aldolase. as you can see, itong dalawa, yung DHAP, this is called DHAP, and this is called G3P. Pwede siya, with the use of the enzyme isomerase, pwede mo siya i-convert. Ang DHAP, pwede mo ma-convert into G3P. Ang G3P, pwede mo siya i-convert into DHAP with the use of isomerase. Sabi ko nga, pag may enzyme na isomerase, there is just a rearrangement ng molecule. Same carbon number, tatlo pa rin, 3 carbon molecule pa rin siya, but there is a rearrangement. So, this is the phase 1 of glycolysis. Sa phase 1, anong nagawa natin? Nagawa natin from glucose na transform natin into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Ang glucose may 6 na carbon atom. Ang glyceraldehyde ay may 3 carbon atom each. So, actually, we produce 2G3P sa process nito. At the same time, we had nakautang tayo ng 2 phosphate. Yan, si hexokinase and phosphofructokinase ang may sala. Because of that, we used energy. Nakagamit tayo ng 2 ATP sa process. Kaya siya energy investment phase, which is the phase 1. Now, let's go to phase 2. Sa phase 2, from G3P, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, with the use of G3P dehydrogenase, nakaproduce tayo ng NADH. So, what is NADH? NADH is a chemical, is an energy molecule. Initially, actually, NAD yan siya. Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Katapos, with the help of dehydrogenase, kaya siya tinawag na dehydrogenase. Nase is an enzyme. It's a protein which functions as an enzyme. Dehydrogenase meaning dehydro. Inalisan mo siya ng hydrogen. So, ang G3P, ang glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, inalisan mo siya ng hydrogen. Ang hydrogen, binigay mo sa NAD, so nakaproduce ka ng NADH, which is a energy molecule. So, ang nangyari is, the end product is 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. At the same time, naglagay ka rin ng isa pang phosphate sa first carbon and the third carbon. Kaya siya bisphosphoglycerate. It's a glycerate molecule na may 2 phosphate sa carbon 1, and carbon 3. So, nandito na tayo. So, ang next step sa process would be from bisphosphoglycerate to 3-phosphoglycerate. Ang ginawa natin, with the help of the phosphoglycerate kinase. Kinase meaning add or transfer. Ang ginawa nila, ang phosphate dito, transfer nila sa ADP. ADP, diphosphate. Naging ATP. So, sa process na to, naka-produce tayo ng isang energy molecule called ATP. Ang end product natin is 3-phosphoglycerate molecule. Ang next step is with the help of phosphoglyceromutase. Mutase. Ang ibig sabihin ng mutase, yun na naman, rearrangement ng molecule. Wherein, ang phosphate group mo, ang phosphate na dati nasa third carbon, transfer mo siya sa second carbon. Kaya siya tinawag 2-phosphoglycerate. Meaning, the glycerate molecule has a phosphate group. Dati nasa third carbon atom, transfer mo sa second. Kaya siya 2-phosphoglycerate. Ang next step is phosphoglycerate to phosphoenol pyruvate. In this chemical reaction, With the help of the enzyme enolase, inalisan mo siya ng hydrogen and oxygen. Oo, ang phosphoglycerate. Kinuha mo ang mineral water niya. So, nakaproduce ka ng tubig, H2O. At ang nangyari sa 2-phosphoglycerate molecule mo, naging PEP, phosphoenol pyruvate. Along the process, nakaproduce ka ng H2O. So, next, ang last step natin is from the phosphoenol pyruvate to pyruvate with the help of the enzyme pyruvate kinase. Sabi ko nga, pag kinase, is either you add or you transfer phosphate. So, ang nangyari, yung phosphoenol pyruvate, yung phosphate group mo, nag-donate ka sa ADP, naging nakaproduce ka ng ATP, and ang last mo is the pyruvate. Ang final step ng glycolysis, nakaproduce ka ng pyruvate molecule. May 3 carbon atom ka sa phosphoenol, may phosphate group ka attached sa 3rd carbon. Because of the kinase, transfer mo ito, kinuha mo, pinambayad mo sa ADP, naging ATP siya. Ang naiwan sa yung chemical or substrate is, product is pyruvate. So, in this chemical reaction, wag muna natin isipin to. In this chemical reaction, nakaproduce tayo ng NAD, which is an energy molecule. Nakaproduce tayo ng ATP, nakaproduce tayo ng water, and another ATP. So, here it's called the energy generation phase or energy production phase. Why? Because nakagawa tayo ng energy molecules, and this NADH can be converted to ATP. Let's move on. So, let's go to products. So, from the glycolysis, nakautang tayo sa energy investment phase ng dalawang ATP. Pagdating natin sa generation phase, sa isang 3-carbon molecule ng pyruvate, naka-generate tayo dalawang ATP. Another 3-carbon molecule ng pyruvate, naka-generate tayo ng 2 ATP. So, 4 lahat. Doon sa kabila naman, isang NADH, so dalawang NADH. So, suma total, glucose molecule na transform natin siya into dalawang pyruvate. Sa process na to, naka-form tayo ng 4 ATP, kaya lang nakautang tayo dito sa taas ng dalawa. So, ang net is dalawang ATP. And we also produce dalawang NADH dito. So, here. So, glycolysis. Ang product ng glycolysis is glucose naging dalawang pyruvate. Naka-form tayo ng dalawang ATP and dalawang NADH. Let's move on. So, this is taken from Lippincotts, 7th edition. Here, from the glucose molecule to pyruvate molecule, dalawang pyruvate molecule, energy investment, nakautang tayo ng dalawang ATP. Sa energy generation phase, we generated 2 ATPs and 2 NADH. As I repeat, ang NADH can still be converted to an ATP para magamit natin as an energy. Now, let's go to details. Sabi nga nila, love is in the details. If you know if you love someone, alam mo ang details regarding that someone. If we love glycolysis, therefore, we should love this process. So, ito pa lang, nahihirapan na tayo. Ito pa lang, nag-give up na tayo. Yung ano ba itong HHS-CCCCP-OOO? To sum it up, kailangan natin i-divide into 2 phases. So, kailangan natin ng strategy. So, dito tayo sa phase 1 and phase 2. And hopefully, makarelate tayo since na-learn na natin ang steps, na-learn na natin ang enzymes, nakita na natin ang how from 6-carbon molecule naging 3-carbon molecule of pyruvate. And na-learn na natin ang mga intermediates and anong mga na-produce nila. Now, we'll go into detail from the chemical structure talaga ng glucose. So, let's go to phase 1. So, this is the glucose molecule. So, makita mo, this is the first carbon atom. Carbon 1, carbon 2, carbon 3, carbon 4, carbon 5, carbon 6. Sabi ko nga, 6 carbon molecule ang glucose. With the help of hexokinase, add or transfer phosphate. Nangutang siya ng isang phosphate sa ATP. Inutang niya tong isa. Nakaproduce ka ng ADP. Or nautangan mo ang ATP, so naging ADP na. Saan mo nilagay ang phosphate? Nilagay mo sa ika-6 carbon. This is the first carbon and this is the 6th carbon. So nandoon yung red na P at 4 na O na oxygen molecule. So this is the phosphate attached to carbon 6. Okay, at least ngayon klaro na, nakikita mo na by molecular level talaga. Next is from glucose 6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate with the help of isomerase. So there is a rearrangement. Diba sabi ko, isomerase, a rearrangement. So ano ang rearrangement nila? Sa carbon 6, almost parehas lang sila. Sa carbon 5, almost parehas lang sila. Carbon 3. So from carbon carbon 4. Carbon 4, 5, and 6, itong tatlong carbon na to, ang glucose and fructose parehas lang. But if you look the first carbon and the second carbon, ang first carbon ng glucose 6-phosphate, iba ang kasama niya. Hydrogen and dalawang hydrogen, isang oxygen. Whereas sa fructose 6-phosphate, ang first carbon mo ay, ang kasama niya is dalawang hydrogen at isang hydroxide. So there is just a rearrangement. And kung tingnan mo, ang double bond ng carbon ng glucose 6-phosphate nasa carbon 1, ang fructose 6-phosphate nasa carbon 2. So there is just a rearrangement, isomerase reaction enzyme. Okay, so from fructose 6-phosphate na naman, let's move on. From fructose 6-phosphate, naging fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. As I have said few times na, bisphosphate kasi dalawang phosphate na ang inattach natin. Saan natin inattach? With the help of kinase. Kinase, add or transfer phosphate. Saan siya kumuha ng phosphate? Nangutang siya sa ATP. Nilagay niya sa carbon 1 and carbon 6. So may dalawang phosphate ka. Kaya siya tinawag na fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Fructose na may attached carbon, na may attached phosphate sa first carbon and attached phosphate sa ikapang-anim na carbon. Kaya bisphosphate kasi dalawang phosphate groups. Next, from fructose 1,6-bisphosphate with the help of the enzyme aldolase, nagawa ang dihydroxyacetone phosphate and glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate or the G3P and the DHAP. If you have noticed, itong color green and color blue, yung tatlong carbon molecule is na-separate na. From deep, so this guys, from 6 carbon, nagiging 2 sets of 3 carbon na siya. So there is a lysis or there is already a breakdown ng 6 carbon molecule into DHAP and glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. If you look at this, DHAP and G3P, pwede siya i-convert mo. Ang DHAP pwede mo i-convert to G3P. Ang G3P pwede mo i-convert into DHAP with the use of isomerase. Ina-arrange niya lang ang enzyme. Ina-arrange niya lang ang molecule, I mean. Same lang sila, tatlo ang carbon. Same lang sila, isa ang phosphate. With the use of isomerase, pwede niya gawin ang G3P into DHAP, ang DHAP and vice versa into G3P with the use of the isomerase enzyme. So this is the ATP investment phase or phase 1 ng glycolysis wherein nakautang tayo ng dalawang ATP. Now, let's move on to phase 2. Pagdating natin sa phase 2, we start with the glyceraldehyde G3P. Here with the help of dehydrogenase, meaning inalisan mo siya ng hydrogen. Dehydrogen. Saan ang inalis mong hydrogen? This hydrogen from the carbon 1 atom, inalis mo siya, nilagyan mo siya ng phosphate. Kaya naging ganito na siya. So, inalis mo ang hydrogen sa carbon, first carbon, nilagyan mo ng phosphate. Kaya naging ang molecule natin with the help of G3P dehydrogenase, ang molecule natin naging 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, meaning meron ang glycerate molecule natin, bisphospho, may dalawa siyang phosphate, naka-attach sa first carbon, ito, and sa third carbon molecule natin. Or third carbon atom pala natin. And next, after 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, with the help of the phosphoglycerate kinase, nagiging 3-phosphoglycerate. As I have mentioned a while ago, when we say kinase, it's either transfer or add phosphate. So, ang ginawa niya, transfer niya ang phosphate dito, transfer niya sa ATP. Initially, ADP siya, 2 P lang. Binigyan natin pa siya ng isang P, kaya siya naging ATP. Saan natin kinuha ang P? Sa carbon 1 ng 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. So, ang product natin is the 3-phosphoglycerate. Ngayon, with the help of phosphoglycerate mutase, transfer natin mula dito sa third carbon ang phosphate into the second carbon. Yun, phosphoglycerate mutase. Sabi ko nga, yung saging na binigay mo sa third student, first student, second student, third, yung saging na binigay mo sa third student, binigay mo lang to the second student. Kaya ang phosphate group natin ito sa first glucose siya third carbon siya naka-attach, nandito na siya ngayon sa second carbon. So ang next, kaya ang name is from 3-phosphoglycerate naging 2-phosphoglycerate na lang siya. And next step is, with the use of the enolase enzyme, naka-release tayo ng H2O or naka-produce tayo ng H2O. Bakit? Anong nangyari doon? Kung tingnan natin yung chemical formula, itong OH, inalis natin sa kanya. Sa third carbon, ito ang third carbon na meron siyang hydroxide, meron siyang OH attach, inalis natin to. Ang nangyari sa third carbon, wala na siyang OH attach, at ang OH natin na-produce na natin into H2O later on. Ang last step would be from the phosphoenol pyruvate hanggang pyruvate. With the help of pyruvate kinase, ulitin ko, kinase, you add or you transfer phosphate. So this phosphate, binigay mo kay ADP, kaya siya naging ATP. And ang product natin is a pyruvate na wala na ang phosphate sa kanya. This is the generation phase or the energy generation phase. I mean phase 2, wherein nakaproduce tayo ng NADH, nakaproduce tayo ng ATP, nakaproduce tayo ng water. Unlike sa phase 1, nakautang pa tayo. Sa phase 2, nakaproduce tayo ng energy molecules. So, malapit na tayo matapos. Ang next is, let's talk about aerobic versus anaerobic respiration. When you say aerobic respiration, it involves glycolysis, katulad ng pinag-usapan natin, na nakaproduce tayo ng 2 ATP and 2 NADH. NADH can still be converted to ATP. Ang next is the citric acid cycle. Pag may oxygen involved, or in example, a human being, may na-inhale oxygen, ang oxygen mo magagamit mo sa mitochondrion. This product, which is the pyruvate, the end product of glycolysis, pag may available oxygen, it will go to the mitochondrion and undergo the citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation. Here, they will still produce more energy molecules, more than exponential than what can glycolysis produce. So, mas marami ang napoproduce ng citric acid cycle and oxidative phosphorylation compared to glycolysis. Compared mo sa anaerobic respiration. Sa anaerobic respiration, Here, pag aerobic respiration. Ito, nangyayari sa mga yeast, no? Na anaerobic condition, pwede nila i-convert ang pyruvate into ethanol and carbon dioxide. Sa mga cells like RBC, red blood cell, and heavily contracting muscles, ang pyruvate pwede natin i-convert into lactate. Ang problem lang, this is in anaerobic condition. Meaning, ang pyruvate without O2, without oxygen, hindi siya papasok sa mitochondrion and undergo Krebs cycle and undergo oxidative phosphorylation. Meaning, kung ano ang na-produce mo sa glycolysis na energy, which is 2 ATP and 2 NADH, hanggang doon na lang. Anaerobic respiration, we have less ATP production as compared to aerobic glycolysis, and lactate is an obligatory end product. So, you can still create ATP, but to a lesser extent. Lastly, let's go to application. Now what? Anong clinical evidence? Clinical relevance ng pinag-uusapan natin. Meron tayong tatlong example ng clinical correlates. Number one, the pyruvate kinase deficiency, which is the most common. You should always remember this. Sa glycolysis problem or sa glycolysis clinical correlates, pyruvate kinase deficiency is the most common. Meaning, wala kang pyruvate kinase. And ang pyruvate kinase, di ba? It's from phosphoenol pyruvate. Tina-transform niya into pyruvate. So, kung wala ka nun, ang pyruvate hindi mo ma-convert into lactate or ang pyruvate hindi mo siya mapasok sa mitochondrion. So, ang nangyayari, nagkakaroon ng hemolytic anemia. Why? Because RBCs, they need energy to maintain the integrity of their cell membrane. Kung kulang sila ng energy, kulang sila ng pyruvate kinase, especially during stress and infection, sumasabog ang RBCs. Another disease is the pyruvate dehydrogenase deficiency. This is a rare neuromuscular disorder. Manifestations are often fatal, severe neonatal lactic acidosis. Saan tong PDH? Di nga natin ito napag-usapan. Ang PDH actually, after ng pyruvate, pumapasok na siya sa mitochondrion. There is such enzyme as pyruvate dehydrogenase deficiency, wherein it can convert pyruvate into acetyl-CoA, and then acetyl-CoA goes into the Krebs cycle. So kung walang pyruvate dehydrogenase deficiency, hindi siya magagamit ng Krebs cycle and oxidative phosphorylation. So ang mangyayari, lahat ng pyruvate mo mako-convert into lactate, magkakaroon ng lactic acidosis. And lastly, aldolase A deficiency. Manifestation predominantly in muscles and RBCs may cause myopathy, rhabdomyolysis, and hemolytic anemia. Saan ang aldolase? This is from the fructose 1,6-bisphospho. Sana tayo para at least klaro. Here, from fructose 1,6-bisphosphate into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate or DHAP phosphate. So kung wala tayong aldolase, hindi tayo makaka-produce ng pyruvate. Hindi tayo, nasa phase 1 pa tayo nito. Nag-uutang pa tayo ng ATP. So, ang mangyayari, it will have a grave clinical problem later on. Ang aldolase, it can cause myopathy, rhabdomyolysis, and later on, hemolytic anemia. So, I hope you learned. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you understood the steps, the process, the products, and I hope you will remember. Thank you. See you next time.